Miami's offseason is in full swing with the start of free agency just days away and a potential deal for Damian Lillard seemingly on hold. To help you get ready for what happens next, we're joined by Sean Deveney to talk about Lillard, Kyle Lowry, and what the Heat will do with Gabe Vincent and Max Strus. All that and more on today's edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, here as always with Dave and Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Joining us today is Sean Deveney, NBA Insider for Heavy.com, who is going to help us talk about Kyle Lowry's future, league-wide interest in Max Strus and Gabe Vincent in a minute. But I want to start where we always do these days, with Damian Lillard. Latest updates, Joe Cronin, GM of the Blazers, released a statement that the Blazers remain committed to building a contender around Damian Lillard. The latest reporting is that Lillard is going to give them some time to see what they could do in free agency. Sean, thanks so much for joining us. What, if anything, can the Blazers do to keep Dame in Portland?
You know, it's going to be tough because if they could have done it, they probably would have done it already. You know, when you look at what they were trying to do around the draft with Anthony Simons and the number 3 pick with Scoot, if you weren't able to get a deal done then for a veteran who was going to put you over the top, then you're probably not going to get anything done now. And so the question becomes, what's going to be enough? You know, what does Damian Lillard see as the threshold of, okay, now we're good enough for me to go back to Portland and play, rather than ask for a trade? And you know, from what I understand, you know, there's been sort of this talk going on in the background that maybe the Blazers aren't that serious about really getting better right now, that they're going to do things to keep themselves competitive, but they're not looking necessarily. Joe Cronin would be happy to go ahead and begin a rebuild. That's probably what's best for the franchise. They know that. They want to do right by Damian Lillard, and they're trying to do that. But at the same time, you know, they can look at the writing on the wall and see, you know, it's time to get this thing rebooted, and that probably is going to have to start. Not probably, is definitely going to have to start with the trade of Damian Lillard eventually.
So you're not really reading too much into this statement, because when I look at it, I just see it as the general manager of the team saying something very short to the media. It was Joe Cronin. There was no Damian Lillard in that statement. I thought the wording was very specific in that Joe Cronin remains committed. The Blazers remain committed to building a contender around Damian Lillard. But we didn't hear anything about vice versa. And I'm not saying that it's one way or the other, but I do wonder if, like why release that kind of statement? Why haven't we heard anything from Damian Lillard's side?
Well, I think from the Blazers side, again, there's a lot of PR going on here in terms of there's a strong portion of the Blazers fan base that's, you know, Dame or die, you know, that they want to go with Damian Lillard as far as they can, and they can't see why you'd want to trade him, et cetera. And I think that the Blazers are very conscious of that, and thus trying to make this a situation where basically Damian Lillard goes to them and says, hey, guys, you got to trade me. And that way they can turn around and say to their fan base, we're doing everything we can for Damian, and we thank him for his service as we send him off to, you know, Brooklyn or Miami or wherever. So, you know, I think that's a big part of this from Brooklyn's, from Portland's point of view. And that's why you get that sort of statement. You know, it is, I do think Damian Lillard's silence is deafening. You know, he is certainly, you know, whether it's through Chris Haynes or however, he's found ways to let his opinions be known. So the fact that we're 24 hours out from this meeting, he hasn't really said too much. You know, that I think that does say a lot in terms of his mindset, and he is truly in a wait and see sort of mode. And like I said, I just can't see anything getting done on Portland's end that's going to push things one way or the other.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because we wanted to know exactly. We talked about this in yesterday's episode as well, but what potential move is even out there that might be enough to build the contender that Dame wants and placate him? and keep him from requesting a trade. And we don't see it. And I was wondering, maybe do you know about any potential deal that might be in the works there? Because to your point, it seems like it would have happened prior to the draft if it was going to happen at all.
Yeah, I think, and certainly, like I say, they did have talks, but anything that they were going to do before the draft, even that was not going. Look, they had Damian Lillard with CJ McCollum and a healthy Nurkic. Before he had that terrible leg injury, and they made it to the conference finals and a little bit of a fluke. It got swept by the Warriors. That's about the ceiling for that team. I think you can look at it and say, okay, who are they going to get that's going to make them better than that team was? Is there any one player? Probably not. There's probably nobody out there who's going to fill that bill. So they're looking, but they're also looking for players who are just going to make them better and fit their system a little bit better. They're shopping Anthony Simons for sure, but they would do that whether Damian Lillard was there or not. They want to get some other pieces. They really like Shaedon Sharpe. They'd like to get a better defender. They've had talks with Toronto about both of those guys, Siakam and Anunoby. Those would both be pretty good fits for them. But again, they'd be having those talks with or without Damian Lillard involved in all this. There isn't any one guy, but they are trying to improve the team. And if they wind up doing it and Damian Lillard stays, then so be it. But they're going to try to improve the team either way.
I think the interesting thing here is just the timing of it all, right? Damian Lillard is not in a rush to leave Portland, and I get it. Like, I think everybody, it's kind of gotten uncomfortable watching like ESPN and stuff lately. It's everybody's saying like Damian Lillard should ask for a trade. What's he even doing? Like, this is the obvious thing for him. But he's been there his entire career. He loves it in Portland. Like, I get it. I get why this could be tough. Even if it's sort of like, we all have people in our lives, maybe that in a relationship that they're not good for each other anymore. And we're like, obviously they should break up. But once you're in it, it's a little bit harder to do it, right? You don't just wake up and like, you know what? Yeah, everybody's right. Let's go ahead and split up. It's a little bit more complicated. And I think that's sort of what's happening here. And I just wonder, like, is there a chance where, even hypothetically, Sean, like, let's say they do move Simons for Anunoby. I'm going to throw that out there. That doesn't get them to where they need to be. We know that. We all know that. But maybe Damian looks at that and he says, okay, they're trying something. And maybe this goes into the regular season. Yeah. And maybe it has, like, is there a world where that happens? And maybe if the eventual split does happen, it has to be something where, okay, we got to play some games and we have to show you on the court that this team isn't good enough still. Right. And then they end up parting ways.
Yeah, I don't see why that couldn't happen. Obviously, I think there's a real rush to try to get things done ahead of the new second apron and the CBA, as those more restrictive rules come in. But at the same time, if you look at what the Wizards did with Bradley Beal, for instance, they rushed that and they did not need to. I don't know what their hurry was to get that done as quickly as they did. If all you were getting was basically, second round picks, it was something that they didn't necessarily have to do. And I think the Blazers can certainly take that same approach, which is, look, this guy's given us 12 years. He's been the rare superstar who isn't asking out, isn't trying to join a super team. So, let's keep going with this. And absolutely, I could see the Blazers say they're not looking at this necessarily like a game of chicken or anything like that. They want to try to make the team better. And if they've got to wait 6 months to do that, then I don't see a real problem. We've seen get the James Harden trade, which looked so impossible. For Ben Simmons, that trade looked so impossible for so long, and then all of a sudden it was possible, and it was possible in January, and that can happen with Lillard as well.
To tie a bow on the Lillard thing, because we've talked about it enough on this show, and I'm sure you've talked about it enough too, Sean, but what do you think ultimately happens here? Any other loose ends that we could tie up here before we move on to other business?
I think eventually he's going to, read the writing on the wall and ask for a trade. And I think it'll probably happen after that first wave of free agency. in early July. So we'll get to Summer League, and I think that'll be the big story of Summer League is that Damian Lillard gets traded. Obviously this is a Heat podcast, but I would say this if I was on a Nets podcast, I think it's going to wind up being the Heat. It's just there's not many other teams out there that are willing to take on the money that Damian Lillard is owed at the age he is. There's just not many teams that are going to be willing to do that. And Miami is in that very small category. So I think he winds up there.
All right. Well, that's interesting. It feels like there's a lot of time between now and maybe when something like that does happen, a first wave of free agency, and the Miami Heat have their own decisions that they have to make in regard to their own free agents. We're going to talk about that, Kyle Lowry specifically, next. But David, first, tell listeners about our sponsor.
For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. When you shop on eBay Sports with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply.
All right, back here with Locked On Heat. Thanks again for making us your first listen every day. Every day is we're going to be back tomorrow with Howard Beck to discuss the biggest questions for the Heat ahead of free agency. So make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Let's get to the Heat's backup plan. If not Damian Lillard, or if they just have to wait on this Damian Lillard decision a little bit longer, what else can they look at doing here? Because some reports are already suggesting that they could switch to money-saving moves, including maybe waiving and stretching Kyle Lowry before September 1st. Sean, what are you hearing in regards to the Heat?
Yeah, the stretch provision is something that the league put in almost a decade ago, and in its first iteration, it was kind of used a fair amount. But over the last 6-7 years, it really has fallen out of favor. Teams just don't want to use it. It does tie you up for 3 years coming, but at a lesser number. And I've heard that there are going to be several teams that are looking to fall back on the stretch provision as they figure out what they want to do to avoid some of these luxury tax things. And certainly Lowry is a guy who would fit that bill. Being at $30 million, and with the Heat already over the luxury tax, and really even before they do anything, breathing down the neck of the second apron, as they're calling it, that's really, really restrictive. So that would be a way to get you out of some of those problems and free you up to maybe be able to sign some of your own guys, as well as use some of the exceptions that they have, the trade player exception they have from the Dedmon deal, as well as the luxury tax mid-level exception that they could use. So, if you want to be able to use those, then that might be your best tool. Obviously, if they could make a Lillard trade or some other trade that would reduce salary, that would be the preferred way to go here. But if that falls through, then cutting and stretching Kyle Lowry's contract is probably the best way to ensure some financial flexibility. It gives you a real shot to at least keep Gabe Vincent, if not Vincent and Strus, and maybe even Kevin Love in there as well, if that's the direction that they want to go. So yeah, it'll be tough. I mean, Kyle Lowry played well in the playoffs. He was not great during the regular season, as we know, but he played pretty well in the playoffs, and you'd hate to just kind of lose them for nothing, but at the same time, that might be where they are with that.
What is the likelihood of including Kyle's salary in a potential trade for Dame or for anybody else? Because we've seen big contracts get moved over the last couple of years. But I mean, with the trade of Chris Paul recently, and of course we saw Russell Westbrook last year. I mean, is there any potential deal out there where Kyle Lowry might be traded to another team if it's not Portland?
Some of that's going to depend on whether the Heat would be willing to put a pick into into such a deal. And, obviously they want to keep their picks to make a superstar trade. The more you because of the Stepien rule, and you can only trade an alternate. They've already got one, and I think it's 2025, right? That they owe to Oklahoma City. So, if you include even one other pick, now you're really locking up the number of picks that you can trade if you do have the opportunity to get a superstar. So I don't think they really want to do that. If they were to include Lowry in a Lillard trade, it would probably have to include Nurkic as well. It'd probably be Lillard and Nurkic going to Miami and Lowry with Herro and maybe Oladipo or something where that does save you a little bit of money. That would be the kind of thing that the Heat would be looking at if they can include Lowry in a Lillard deal. You'd have to take back Nurkic, but I think they'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, just to dive into some of the financials here a little bit without boring the audience too much. Right now, Miami's payroll with Lowry is like $178.5 million. If you do this with the waive and stretch, it would go down about $20 million to $158.5 million there. And then you'd obviously take on that $9.8 million cap hit for the next 2 seasons, including obviously this season in dead money. So that would be feasible, right? It would get you below the tax. It would be something that obviously would help Mickey Arison. Like you said, Sean, it would kind of unlock a mid-level exception, which would be worth somewhere in the range of $6 million, if I have that right.
That's right. Yeah.
And so you've got all that. I do wonder if there's maybe a trade out there. Like I look at a team like San Antonio, who has a reported need for a veteran point guard. Right now, Kyle Lowry might be a little bit too rich for them at $30 million. But I don't know, like they have the cap space, and if they're not able to use it on something else, they've been tied to other centers and other point guards and stuff like that. But it might be something similar to Lillard, right, where you just have to wait. They have until September 1st to use this waive and stretch provision. So it might be something where they're just waiting on maybe the market for Lowry to tell them what to do, basically.
Yeah, and that's right. That it's kind of the Oklahoma City special, right? Where you take a veteran with the pick and you park the veteran for a year. Maybe you can even turn around if you're San Antonio and flip him at the trade deadline and get another pick or some other asset. If not, then that's fine too. But you wind up with the pick. And the thing about Miami's picks is everybody can look at what we can all see, and that's Jimmy Butler's 34. So. If you start looking at their picks in 28 or 29, you say, well, they might be a bit of a lost franchise at that point. That might be a time where we can, come in and get a lottery pick. Those picks will be pretty valuable if they want to get rid of Kyle Lowry that way. There's a chance they could, but it's a tough thing to do with a $30 million hit. It's just not that much cap space out there for these teams that even ones like San Antonio that have a lot of cap space. That's still quite a bit to use on a guy that you're not gonna you're probably not gonna go forward with.
Looking on like kind of the other side of that, though, what if Miami, instead of trying to save money, kind of does what the Warriors did with Jordan Poole, where you flip the long-term money that they're trying to get off of for an expiring contract like Chris Paul? Like, is there more? Like, I know Jordan Poole's already been moved. John Collins has already been moved. Kind of like this long money that teams have been trying to get off of. Are there any other contracts out there like that could make sense for a team that might be looking to maybe not get off that money now, but you get that Lowry expiring and that has some value to them to get off that?
Yeah, and I think that's why the Heat have been connected to guys like Levine from Chicago and Paul George would be another with the Clippers. That the extent to which those teams are really shopping those guys, you can certainly question. But that's why when you've got a Kyle Lowry and you've got some picks, then you could certainly be involved if those teams get serious about moving those players. And from what I've understand, you can check out the trade value of a player. Doesn't mean you're going to trade them. And I think that's what's happened with in both of those situations. But when you do check out the trade value, you're also laying some groundwork. So there's a chance that that somebody like that can come up as well.
Well, we have another point guard we want to talk about, Gabe Vincent. Who do the Heat prefer? What do they do with Max Strus? What's the market out there for Max Strus? Can they bring any of these guys back? We're going to talk about all of that next here on Locked On Heat. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, we'll be back tomorrow with Howard back to discuss the biggest questions for the Heat ahead of free agency. So make sure that you're subscribed. You can do that on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Let's go to Miami's own free agents, specifically Gabe Vincent and Max Strus. From what I understand, I think the Heat would prefer to keep Gabe Vincent over Kyle Lowry. Doesn't feel like they're going to bring both of them back, especially if Gabe's going to be getting paid somewhere in the range of $10 million plus per year, which seems to be his projected value here. That's $40 million combined to Vincent and Lowry for something that's less than elite at that position. That doesn't seem like a responsible use of cap funds there, right, Sean? So Gabe is 10 years younger than Kyle Lowry. What do you think the market is for Gabe Vincent? Are you hearing similar to that $10 million range? And is there a world where he could just bring Gabe Vincent back and then just and kind of wait out the Kyle Lowry thing and just kind of let that thing play out?
Yeah, certainly that's going to be an option. It's not like if they signed Gabe Vincent, right on June 30th, that all of a sudden all these penalties are going to kick in. They'll have time before those penalties kick in that they could decide and ultimately make the decision to stretch Kyle Lowry's contract. So yeah, I think that signing and keeping Gabe Vincent is if that's where they want to go, and I'm with you. I think that is where they want to go. You've got to look at what the other options are. There aren't any other great other options for the price range they're going to be looking at. So I think that that you keep the player and then work out the financial stuff afterwards. At least in this case, there's a handful of teams that are going to have the full mid-level exception. That's sort of an old-fashioned thing. Not many teams have that anymore, but there are going to be a handful, and that could be just about where Gabe Vincent's market is. But the problem for him is there aren't a ton of teams that need a point guard like him. Maybe a Minnesota would be a possibility. Utah's got that available, and Utah probably wouldn't necessarily keep Gabe Vincent long term, but it would be a pretty good value contract that they could do something with down the road. So a team like that, with the full mid-level exception, that's probably the kind of team that you'd have to look at as somebody who'd come in and try to get a Gabe Vincent.
Seems like we're hearing a lot more buzz about Gabe and potential destinations via free agency, but what's the market like on Max Strus? Have you heard anything? Because I think he's lost some perceived value around the league, despite the fact that he was a starter over the last couple of seasons. But given his performance, his woeful performance in the NBA Finals, has that kind of soured the market on Max, or is he still a player that some teams might be willing to invest in free agency?
Yeah, I'd always be cautious about saying like, well, he was bad in this series and therefore, he's lost value, just because, teams do kind of take, if you're, a smart team, then you're going to, not make decisions based on that sort of thing. You're going to look at the whole picture. Certainly Gabe was terrific in the playoffs. And not so much in the regular season. I mean, he was not great in the regular season. His improvement kind of mirrored what the Heat did in the playoffs compared to the regular season. And so, yeah, I do think, for both of those guys, for Strus and Gabe Vincent, that's been the case. But yeah, with Strus, I'd put his number and it's crazy because I've heard everything from, well, he's going to get a Duncan Robinson kind of contract. I just don't see that happening. I just don't see anything like that. He's going to get something more like the tax mid-level, which is $5-6 million starting deal. I think the truth is probably somewhere in between on Max. That that when you look at his regular season, when you look at what he did in the playoffs, you probably put him right about the same amount as Gabe. But again, it's going to be beauty in the eye of the beholder. I think the Bulls are a team that would have an eye on. That's a hometown, and I think they really regard it. He was with them, and he got hurt with their G League team. They liked him, so yeah, that's a possibility. And they're a team that does have that full mid level, so they wouldn't necessarily have to use the whole thing to get Max Strus, but that would certainly be a team that you'd have to look out for.
kind of sort of like 3 for $30 million, somewhere around that vicinity?
I'd say, yeah. I don't think 5 for $90. I don't think that'll. I don't think that's what we're looking at with him. But again, it depends who you ask on that.
Well, that's a great segue. Like, what's the read on Duncan Robinson? Because I think a lot of Heat fans might want him traded, but of course he showed some value, not just in the finals, but throughout Miami's playoff run. Do you think there's a team that sees Duncan's contract and says, you know what, he's still an elite level shooter. He's seen, he showed some passing chops, some ability to make off-ball cuts and things of that sort. Is there a chance where Miami might find a suitable partner for Duncan Robinson and his contract?
Next year, I think you got to have another year. I think you got to have another year come off that deal. It's still three pretty big years for a guy with his limitations. So I think they're going to have him for another season. Unless he's part of a bigger deal. With Herro and picks and such. But again, I don't think the Heat are all that eager to include picks just to include them. If they were, they could probably have traded Duncan Robinson by now. But we talked about sort of the parking thing that Oklahoma City does, where you basically park a veteran and then try to move him on. I think Duncan Robinson would be a great candidate for that. The Heat don't want to include any picks to get rid of Duncan Robinson. So, I think it's another year with Duncan Robinson before he becomes really a guy teams would look to trade for.
All right, let's go some round robin to finish this up. Listener questions, kind of like a lightning round here. This one comes from Kyle, who writes in, worst case scenario, Damian Lillard stays. Herro has to become the scoring addition, but this team still lacks front court depth and size. What are some options Miami could look at, whether free agency or trade, to improve the front court? I think we just go round robin on this thing, but Sean, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think they will bring back Kevin Love. I think that there's a couple guys, free agents that they could look at kind of who are in their wheelhouse in terms of young guys that they could improve. Darius Bazley is one who comes to mind, and O'Shea Brissett from Indiana. I think those are both kind of heat kind of guys that they could take some of their talent and really develop them.
David, any names that pop into mind for you?
Brissett's a nice name. I like his potential. He's got some hops there. Yeah, he showed in limited minutes in Indiana. I don't know why they would let him go, but if he's a guy who's looking to improve, maybe make a 1+1 deal or something, or even just a minimum veteran deal, something in Miami where he can continue to show that progress and parlay that into a future contract, it makes a lot of sense.
Worth pointing out that as long as if they don't waive and stretch Kyle Lowry during the beginning parts of free agency and they're basically operating over the tax, they're only going to have the veteran minimum to use here. So I just wanted to mention that. Sean Rochester writes in, thoughts on Victor Oladipo and a second-round pick or multiple second-round picks for somebody like Kelly Olynyk or Larry Nance Jr.? Sean, what do you think?
If I'm the Heat, I'm all for it. You got nothing to lose there, but I'm not sure Miami has any second-round picks left, right? I think they
just have the two in 2029 and 2030, which are far away. And I don't know, even if Utah's trying to get off of Kelly Olynyk, having now acquired John Collins, I don't know if that's something that they would be interested in for a far away second-round pick.
Olynyk is Danny Ainge's guy, and so it's going to take something. There were plenty of teams trying to get him at the deadline last February, and they were not able to do that because Ainge had a pretty high value on Olynyk. So I don't see that changing.
Last thing here, got a couple of questions on Twitter about DeAndre Hunter. We obviously saw Atlanta move John Collins. They are very active in these trade talks, but they saved a lot of money on that John Collins deal. What's their stance right now on DeAndre Hunter in terms of what you're hearing around the league, Sean, and what's the value kind of pegged on him right now? Yeah,
that one of the reasons they traded Collins for the very scant return that they got was so that they wouldn't have to trade DeAndre Hunter necessarily. But, understanding that they are going to have to do an extension for Murray, they're very conscious of that. They've got some other contracts they'd like to get out of. That's probably what they're going to try to do first. But yeah, there's no question that Atlanta is, I wouldn't call it a fire sale, but they're definitely trying to cut back on what they're paying to whom, and trying to refocus. And roster balance is going to be the name of the game going forward, and that could wind up costing them DeAndre Hunter. I wouldn't say it's right now in the short term, but certainly I think maybe by the trade deadline next year, if this team's not much better, he could be a name you'll see put out there in February.
David, anything else?
No, I think that covers it. There's a lot of unknowns here, and Miami's not in an ideal position. So that's why I've been kind of warning Heat fans, expecting the big swing. And even if the big swing doesn't, hit, that maybe there'll be some other options out there. But it just doesn't seem like there are a whole heck of a lot of them for Miami. And at this time, I mean, look, it was a good enough team to go to the NBA Finals. And yes, while they might lose Vincent and Strus, there's still the possibility of Herro continuing to improve, Bam continuing to improve, etc. I'm curious though, Sean, and maybe you can answer this. Like, has Miami's run to the finals, and I talked about this a couple episodes ago, but I know it's perceived as somewhat of a fluke, but has it impacted the way other GMs look at free agency in terms of team building? You kind of hinted at it right now. It's more about kind of having a balanced roster as opposed to just making a swing for like a superstar or a big three or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question that probably goes back even further. That teams have been trying to get Eric Spoelstra like coaches, and I'm interested to see if more teams will, especially with the success that they've had with zone defense, if that's something more teams, more coaches will try to get. It's very hard for coaches to convince players to play zone because they view it as an infringement on their manhood if you can't, if you're not playing man-to-man defense. So I expect what the Heat are doing to continue to impact what other teams are trying to do. But then again, like I say, that's really been that way for the last 10 years or so.
Sean Deveney does a great job, NBA Insider for Heavy.com. You could follow him at Sean Deveney on Twitter. Sean, thanks so much for joining us, man. This was good.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Every day, we're going to be back tomorrow with Howard Beck to discuss the biggest questions for the Heat ahead of free agency. In the meantime, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.